3 times a day, I mean, it just.
If you ever get a chance, stop over there and just look at their operation.
That's quite the operation.
It is quite nice.
I was out
6
there.
months.
Well, I used to pick up milk in operations.
Robots
Yeah.
They're generally all the
We
same.
know it works.
Barnyard.
It's, I don't know.
Incredible.
So we
Billy
buy-
sells gas and
We had log tanks, we would hold you down on 4 or 5 steps to get to their top.
Okay, I'll have to
It's
remember
on right
that.
now.
That is
Yeah,
nice.
one leg
Okay.
potato, but then you got.
We've had
When
their
they get to
steaks.
be a certain
It was
age, they're all
delicious.
sterile.
So it's just
And
like
their
kind
ground
of,
beef.
Yeah,
I
and
bought
they
a
put
doesn't
your
beef
know
name
she's
on
tried
the
to
list,
eat it.
and then when he,
Oh,
he'll
they
tell you
really,
when he's
ventilation
going
in
to
the
what
summer,
you
they really
like,
take
and
care of
then
their
he'll
cows.
put, he has a custom.
Exactly.
Did you get more?
And what they feed them,
That's gonna
you know,
work.
they have to
Yeah,
feed them.
he's
when
got a
you-
lot of compliments on it.
yeah,
If it's
that's
really
good.
sweet, so less feed.
Okay, well,
It's recorded.
it's recording now. Well, good morning, everyone. We're another edition of Science and the Savior of Bible study from Concordia Publishing House from Professor Angus Manouche, who teaches down at Concordia, Wisconsin. So today we're on page 36. Last time we kind of watched a video that kind of put a lot of things into perspective. We looked at the immensity of the universe, you know, via the stars and galaxies, and then we saw the immensity of the universe when it comes to atoms, when it comes to DNA, when it comes to our cells. So, I mean, to kind of start us out, if you open up your Bible workbooks to page 36, there's kind of an interesting quote by Albert Einstein. Everyone knows Albert Einstein. And at the bottom it says, Einstein said that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Okay, now how do you understand that?
That it makes sense? Or that
Yes, absolutely,
It's
very good, it
understood.
makes sense. In other words, there's an order to it all. It's not random, it's not haphazard, it's not like technology, okay? A few moments ago, we were kind of commenting on, you know, the difficulties we have between live streaming and recording, and we live stream a lot of things here at church, but sometimes it breaks down, or there's some kind of algorithm that gets in the way. There, you know, it ends up being haphazard. But when it comes to, you know, God's order and God's design, there's a plan. You know, there's a sense of order to everything. And, you know, sometimes we have to look a little hard. And, you know, that's why we have like the Hubble Space Telescope that's, you know, peering the vast immensity of the universe that, you know, is in a constant orbit above the Earth. And then there's something called the CERN Accelerator in CERN, Switzerland, that is a particle smasher, okay? And what that's doing is opening up the universe of matter, you know, protons and neutrons and all of that, and quarks. Quarks was thought for a long time to be kind of the smallest bit of matter, but, you know, the next question is, well, what's a quark made out of? Okay? And it just kind of goes on and on and on and on. And, you know, God doesn't give up his secrets easily. You know, that's why he's given mankind, you know, a brain and the ability to think. And that separates us from the rest of the created world that, you know, you hear time and time again, science talking about the fact that man is just nothing more than a highly evolved animal. Well, animals are driven by instinct. Animals are driven by, well, to a certain extent, observation. They just sit and they watch you, and they kind of figure out what your pattern is, you know? I mean, my little dog, I'm using that word mine, but, you know, if I get up from the couch and he's, you know, by Sarah, who's sitting on the love seat there, he just automatically just gets up. You know, he won't let me pet his head on that little love seat. But if I'm reaching down, I can pat him on the head if he's, you know, in the kitchen. I mean, it's weird. You know, what's going on in this little canine brain? I don't know.
protect
And
his wife.
I don't. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's about it. So, no, he's getting up and running away from her. Yeah, right, because when I get up, then he gets up, so it's just weird, I don't know. And I don't have the time to figure it out either, nor do I want to. So. But anyway, I think that's a very interesting observation by Einstein, that what we think is incomprehensible is really, as far as when you begin to start unraveling it and pulling it apart, yeah, it does make sense. It isn't just all random facts. So, and as our author points out, this really shouldn't surprise Christians, because our God is a God of order. He isn't a God of randomness. He isn't a God of let's throw the dice and see where they go. He has a plan, and he carries out his will each and every moment that this reality continues until he brings this reality to its end, on the last day. So, C.S. Lewis once said, God provided the missing passage that makes sense of it all. And that missing passage, of course, would be Christ, the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So let's look at Colossians 1, first of all, when we talk about the immensity of the universe. And we want to turn the page on page 37, Colossians 1, 16 and 17. And what does the supremacy of Christ give confidence to the scientist who is a Christian? Or even to ourselves, as we look at the wonder of nature. Colossians 1, 16 and 17. Okay, so Colossians 1, 16 and 17 says, for by him, the him of course would refer to Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Okay, so let's unpack this for a moment here. I think we have a pretty much of a grip on the idea of the visible world, but there is a whole invisible world that we don't see, okay? It's an invisible world that for the scientists reveals itself in a microscope, or maybe you can remember that from your biology class, or, in high school, looking into, a little slide that was filled with pond water, and then all the little googly, swimmy things, just, going round and round there, okay? Or the first time you ever maybe had to dissect a frog. How many of you ever had to do that in high school? Okay? We had to even dissect cats. So that was really slimy and icky. They were in formaldehyde, and then I know they had some kind of grease over them, and they were in these plastic bags, so you would have to, you put these gloves on and you have to reach in there and pull that thing out. It's just kind of a goopy mess, but it was kind of interesting. You kind of open it up, and they had it kind of all nicely as far as the cardiovascular system was concerned between, with the heart where you could see where the blood had pumped out, the oxygenated blood, and then the blue would be the spent blood that had to go back to the heart and the cardio system to get its oxygen again. So that was kind of interesting. And then the muscle structure, the sinews, and all that stuff. I mean, you have to kind of distance yourself from it. I mean, you have to get out beyond that. It's a dead cat that you're looking at. So.
Did they have the boys and the girls team together, and then the boys pulled out the girls?
This was all boys. This
okay.
was an all boys school. So I mean, well, and you know what boys do?
Throw it at each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Whack off the tail, and slap someone on the back of the neck with it, or you're off to the races then. So, okay. So we have a good handle on what the visible world is, but the invisible world, that's something, I think really ought to give everyone pause, because if there is a invisible world that becomes visible as a result of a microscope or an electronic microscope, or through a telescope, because the telescope, like the Hubble, has revealed, parts of the universe that we would never begin to see with the naked eye. that ought to give us pause too, that there is an invisible universe that we aren't even aware of. And that is, I think what I know that the Apostle Paul is talking about here. He talks about thrones and dominions, rulers or authorities. So, when we talk about Satan, when we talk about the forces of evil, this is not, just fairy tale stuff or the stuff of, the Middle Ages. This is a reality. If we can see the invisible world as a result of instruments, well then we also need to trust God that when he talks about this in his word, that he's also giving us the truth. When we talk about, God's invisible world of cherubim and seraphim and angels, then also there has to be a world of Satan and his demons as well. So, but the key thought here for us is, he says, all things were created through him and for him. Now, how do you understand that last phrase? Things created through him and for him.
Well, everything has a purpose, no matter how small.
Okay. It's like when men are working in their workshop and they make something. I mean, you make that out of the materials that God has created in the world for your use or for your pleasure. The same thing is true, as far as ladies are concerned. If you're, doing some handiwork or some, baking or that, you do that for the benefit, for your own satisfaction and for, there's joy in making things, right? When you have a hobby that way. And the same thing is true about our God. I mean, we're a reflection of him. As it brought joy to him, so also it brings joy to us when we're able to do these things too. So when we say that this is done for his honor and glory, well, that's absolutely true. God has created the universe for his honor and his glory. But then look at that last phrase, or that last verse. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So what that means is God is superglue. Now what do I mean by that?
Well, if you'd let her go, it'd fall apart.
That's right. If it let go, boom, it would just all shatter. So God is the one that keeps it all together. And I think that's really what baffles a lot of scientists too. I mean, they get to these minute particles like quarks and stuff like that, or they look at the vastness of the universe and how this all works together. I mean, what is the driving force here? Well, the driving force, as the Apostle Paul says, is the Lord. It's God. He keeps everything going and moving and operating the way he wants it to. So as our author says, this is the supremacy of Christ. Because he's the one who is the master maker and preserver of all of these things. And for the scientists then, if someone like Albert Einstein, could see that there was plan and order in the universe, well then how much more so should the Christians see that too? That there's plan and order in this world, and there's plan and order in my life, and there's plan and order in the way we get the business of life done too. Nothing's random. So okay, so words to remember there from Acts chapter 17. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples made by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. These are the words of the Apostle Paul to the very learned people in Athens. Remember, he went to the Areopagus, and that's where people gathered to talk about stuff, okay? The philosophers and that. So it's kind of like a big gossip session. And when Paul came to Athens for the very first time, they wanted to hear about this new teaching that the Apostle Paul had. So he was invited about, to talk about these things. But when they heard about the resurrection from the dead, that's when they cut it off. Because for the Greeks, that was the line in the sand. There was no physical resurrection of the body. You live now, and there is no hereafter. There is no hereafter. And that sounds strangely familiar, because there's a whole world out there that's living exactly the same way. You better grab for everything you've got going right now, because afterwards there's nothing coming. There's nothing coming. So, but for the child of God, this Lord that holds up the entire universe, he's going to reconstitute you on the last day and join you together, body and soul together, in a glorified state to live with him in the new heaven and new earth forever and ever. That's God's promise to you. That was sealed in your baptism. So any questions here on these passages from Colossians and Acts?
The Sadducees believed that too, didn't they?
Yep, the Sadducees were, because they were people who, well, if you look at the Pharisees and the Sadducees, these were two religious groups, but they also, there were political overtones to these groups. To put it in modern day terms, your Pharisees were kind of your nationalists, and the Sadducees were your globalists. Okay, now what do I mean by that? Well, nationalists believe that, resources and culture and everything, that belongs to the nation. Globalists, on the other hand, believe that everything belongs to everyone, the world over, okay? And for the Pharisees, they were all about Judea first, because they were God's people. Because the promises have been given to them through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that from them the Savior would be born. The Sadducees, on the other hand, were more liberal in their thinking, that they really came into play, following the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC under Nebuchadnezzar. That Babylon became a world power. After that, the Greeks came. After that, the Romans came. So there was a much bigger world to play in. That's why I called them kind of globalists. So while they talked about a savior, they understood him more in political terms. But what they did is they took a little bit of this, that, and everything from all the other cultures that were going on in the world, and they created their own idea of religion. So for them, there was no resurrection of the dead, because the Greeks believed that. And for a lot of people, it just simply makes sense, because people judge life, they judge reality on what? On the basis of their five senses. Dead people don't come back to life. Yes, John?
I can't help but think when Jesus was crucified, he said tombs are open, people came. But at that time, word didn't travel. Not if that would happen nowadays, everybody had their phone on them and they're walking around. But then, word like that didn't travel. There, the people were raised from the dead. I don't know what they remembered or said. Would be interesting to know.
Right. Lazarus was raised from the dead. The young man of Nain. I mean, the daughter of Jairus. I mean, all these people. Think of the prophet. I'm getting mixed up here. Elisha with the little boy upstairs, and he brought him back from the dead. I mean, through the power of God. So when people want to deny that, well, when you begin to look at the universe and see how it's constructed and how it's made, well, then it isn't just such a great leap of faith to believe or to understand, too, that God can reconstitute the dead to make them alive. And not alive in a spiritual sense or in the sense that we keep their memory alive, but alive in the physical sense of a bodily resurrection. That's what we're talking about. So for the Sadducees, they just simply assimilated a lot of the thinking that was going on in the current world and tried to play this middle road so that they could be preserved with their power and their influence and their money. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they looked at the people as kind of the antagonists. In other words, we got to subdue them. But among Pharisees and Sadducees, there was no love lost. They really didn't like each other because they had different outlooks. Okay, let's move on then to science serves our neighbors. This is going to be kind of an interesting unit here from Dr. Manouche. He says, the stereotype of the mad scientist expresses the fear that scientists may be so consumed by their desire to know how things work and to make things happen that they lose good judgment and act unethically. Okay. Now, I don't know how much reading you had to do in high school, but that Mary Shelley, she was the author of the first really dark Gothic novel called Frankenstein. Okay? And I mean, you've seen the movies, there have been countless movies with Frankenstein now. You know, Dr. Frankenstein, harvested a lot of body parts, sewed them together, and, juiced them up with lightning, and then you can see that old black and white movie where the sparks like flying in there, and or what was the other one with the comedian?
Gene Wilder.
Gene Wilder, thank you, Gene Wilder. He's alive. Remember that?
But I think, okay, so he had good intentions of bringing a dead person back to life, but then they ended up getting, they got Abby Normal's brain. Instead of a normal brain. They got Abby Normal.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
And then, who was like a deranged killer or whatever. Whatever
Right.
he was. So it's almost like he had good intentions, but then it went south,
Yeah.
Like a lot of things do.
Yeah.
Like a lot of things do. And I see that's the problem. I mean, mankind or scientists can have this high, noble ideal, but when it gets filtered down and translated into the world of reality, it's completely different than what the intentions were. Okay? Well, let's talk about the study of viruses. I mean, can't be anything more current or hot than today. The noble intention there is maybe we can learn how to control viruses so that they don't harm people. But now we're all becoming familiar with this one phrase, or should be familiar with this phrase, gain of function. You know what that is? Gain of function. That's scientific talk for weaponizing viruses. So in other words, the thinking here is, okay, they're studying viruses. Those people over there are studying viruses among the nations. So we have to study viruses to do what?
Defend ourselves.
To protect ourselves. So gain of function means we weaponize the viruses so that we could kill other people
Before they kill us.
But the reality is with a virus,
Goes where it wants.
it
Indiscriminate.
kills everyone.
Right. If you let it go, you're gonna get it too.
Exactly. I mean, if you follow the news now, there's, as of about a month and a half ago, there is a man in China who has a new virus.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
It was way off in some wild area of China and he got it, they don't know.
Yep, was hospitalized for it, so that'll be the next.
Somebody didn't like him and.
Well, yeah, I
Bingo.
don't know. I mean, it all gets to be crazy. But again, I mean, immediately when we hear this kind of talk, what goes through our minds?
Here we go.
Right?
Yeah, here we go again.
Grab everything. Get panicked. I mean, we're Christians, aren't we? We can't let ourselves go bananas. I mean, we've gone bananas once. We're all in the hands of the Lord. And I mean, those words have to mean something for us. When the Apostle Paul says, whether we live to the Lord, or whether we die to the Lord. Whether we live or die, what's the conclusion? We are the Lord's.
And
That's
he
what that
has-
means.
And he has all our days written in his book and all our years
Exactly.
counted.
Right. So,
Think there is any connection. I know I've heard in China, I had somebody comment to me, said those people that eat anything in those live markets, they buy animals that aren't Well, God in the Bible had animals that were unclean. You think there's a connection there where there are some animals we shouldn't consume, like bats and stuff like that.
Yeah, I suppose, well, yeah, bats and a lot of those rodents, you know, they're disease carriers too. I mean, it's the nature of where their function is in creation, you know, and,
Maybe that was God's purpose. He instituted it. Was that the reason in the Old Testament? Certain animals were unclean, they shouldn't eat them, but
I haven't done enough study in that about
Part of
the
it
health
is, they
benefits.
didn't always cook their food at first.
Right, and, okay, now, well, take for instance ham. You know, when I was growing up, or even the generation before, you know, hams really had to be cured because of trichinosis. Is that correct? Okay, now they have virtually wiped out trichinosis in hogs, from what I understand. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I think I read that somewhere. But nowadays, you don't know because one says one thing, another one says another thing.
Yeah, but it has to be cooked well done.
Yeah, it has to be cooked well, right, so was God protecting his people that way with pork? You know, that could have been something too.
well, I know it said there's a passage when he told Noah that or what. Eat animals, but without their blood in it. It should be
Right.
blood free release or whatever.
Right.
So that meant don't eat it raw, I thought.
Yeah, don't eat it raw, exactly, we're not just savages, so, right. So, yeah, you know, with all the diets that go on in this world, I've never heard anyone, you know, talking about holding up the kosher diet as being overly healthy, so I don't know. Something to Google.
Well, seagulls are not supposed to eat.
Ooh, no, yeah, I would be-
Crows,
Crows, no. When you think of shrimp and lobster, I mean, where do they live?
Bottom feeders.
Surgeon. What are they all consuming? What floats to the bottom?
all the junk. And that's what they're cleaning up the bottom.
They're cleaning up the bottom.
Surgeon,
Yeah, right, exactly. So,
bullheads.
bullheads,
Well, that is God's purpose, like,
Catfish.
buzzards and stuff, they're the nature's cleanup crew, they clean up the dead.
yeah, right, I know there was when I went up north, Sunday to Monday, I was just a little south of Tomahawk, I was driving along, and then all of a sudden, here's this roadkill, and wow, what's that by, here was a big old bald eagle. I mean, right on the shoulder, I mean, there's a lot of traffic, you know, looking up and then picking some more and eating that, so. God's way of cleaning up creation, so. Okay, so Frankenstein, so the idea of something noble turning into something awful, that's the reality. So, the paragraph that follows says, but today we see scientists engaged in stem cell research, and of course, you know, now when we talk about stem cell research, we need to have some thought in our minds there too, because there's stem cell research that comes as a result of abortion tissue. And then there is stem cell research that comes as a result of umbilical cords. Okay? Umbilical cords are very rich in fresh cells. And, you know, scientists are making stuff out of that, which we would not have a problem with. But when you take, you know, aborted fetuses and, you know, besides, you know, the arms and the legs, the eyes, the fingers, or whatever else, you know, they're selling on the open market, and then, you know, use these cells for research, I mean, that we would have a problem with. You know, so, you know, it pays to ask some questions. It just pays to ask some questions and to be aware. So stem cell research, disregarding questions raised about God-given value of human life. We hear of scientists paid by tobacco companies to create the false impression that there is no significant health risks associated with smoking. The other day, I was listening to the news, and this was, you know, one of those top of the hour news things, you know, where you know, they give you like a 15-second blurb of news, and believe it or not, smoking is at an all-time high the world over.
Is it really?
Yeah. Now, why would that be?
Pandemic.
Hmm?
Pandemic.
Yeah. It's a way of relieving your stress. Exactly. You have a little nicotine high. So. I know I tried smoking for a while, but all it gave me was a headache. So, I don't want that, so. Okay, then how about we see pharmaceutical scientists developing more and more drugs that are aggressively marketed? I mean, every time you turn on, you know, some kind of TV show at cable or regular mainstream, you'll see all these drugs that are being sold. And, you know, the people that use them, what are they doing? They're running in the sunshine, they're playing with their kids, everyone is happy, happy, happy. So, you know, and that becomes a powerful image because I'm so miserable, miserable, miserable. Maybe if I get on that, I'll feel better. And so what do people do? They go to the doctor. Oh, I want some of that. And I want some of that now. And then it gets to be a double whammy because the pharmaceutical interests have salesmen that go out to the doctors and they say, if you prescribe so much of product X and X, you'll get this kind of kickback. You'll get this kind of bonus. You'll get this free trip to Europe. You'll get this or that or a cruise or whatever. So, and then what happens with this new drug that was supposed to make everyone happy, happy, happy? About 6 months later.
Price goes up.
Hmm?
Price goes up.
Oh, the price goes up, but it's even worse than that.
Kill something else in your body.
Yeah,
They see the reactions.
it created a
Yeah.
different reaction that it wasn't intended for. And some people have stroked out.
Or someone, what they tell you, you want to take that.
Oh, I know, yeah.
And
High
gamble. It's like
high
rolling
blood
the dice.
pressure, heart disease,
Yeah.
blah, blah, and or death.
Yeah.
That's the one that's always the kicker. And or death. If you or a loved one was blah, 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 and or death, call the law offices of blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah,
I was
blah,
just
blah,
waiting
blah.
for that.
And if you're allergic to it, don't take it. How do you know you're allergic to it?
That's a good one, yeah. That's a
That
good
way
one.
they can't sue you, you can't sue them then because they already told you what can happen.
Right, right, so. Well, against better judgment, he or she sometimes does just that. All of this makes us wonder whether science can really be a moral enterprise. And I mean, that's kind of what we're left with. It's nothing more than big business. So, question number 37 says, as a group, list other moral dilemmas raised by scientific activities, and which one concerns you the most?
Probably the sex changes.
Okay,
That's crazy.
why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Well,
I was shocked to find out, I don't know where I saw this, but anyway, anyone could go into their doctor and say, you know, I'm not really happy with my gender. And the doctor will either prescribe or refer you to a doctor who will give you all of the hormones right then and there to begin the process. And you literally can change your, well, when I use that term, change your gender, I'm using that, you know, facetiously, because you're not really changing your gender, because you were created with one gender. But it all can happen within the space of a year. Boom, like that. Okay, where I saw that, was Tucker Carlson. Now, I know Tucker's not everyone's cup of tea.
oh, I like,
Well, for our audience out there, you know. But Tucker had this Billy, what was his name? He was a guy who went through a sex change operation and then went back to his original gender. And he talked about the utter misery that he went through. The complete and total misery. And he said the thing that was so frightening, he said, is it all happened within the space of less than a year. I mean, the genital mutilations, the whole 9 yards. So, right.
you you still have the equipment, what are you gonna do with that? What can the doctor do with that? You still got the equipment,
I know,
we're talking about?
but they cut it apart and they make it work. That's what they do.
Maybe they use it on the other sex that wants to be, they'll just interchange.
It's very, very sad. It's very sad.
And then why, disrupt what God created as perfect and
Right,
make it imperfect?
right.
It's like making a Frankenstein.
Yeah, right, we're making a whole race of Frankensteins.
I was listening to WRBM yesterday,
Mhm.
and the news thing came on in Germany. The Lutheran Church opened up, they made it sound like it was all the Lutherans in Germany opened it up for transgender,
Okay.
the ministers and
Oh,
priests
okay,
or
so
whatever
we're
else they
welcoming all
have.
that. Okay.
But what it really boils down to, that's ELCA.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
But they made it sound like it was all Lutherans are doing that, and that's-
everyone's embracing this now, right, yeah,
Yeah.
so, not everyone, right?
yeah.
Well, how about some other issues?
the, I think it's AI, artificial intelligence.
Okay,
Yeah, I got some books and DVDs by Billy Crone, and you can see him on YouTube too. And he's a pastor. He believes in the Lord. He doesn't believe anything, weird.
Mhm.
And you can look on Google yourself. That Google is building an army of robots.
yeah,
And they also, I don't know the names of them, but they're two giants that are, into computers and the web and all that. And one says they should stop before they leave the demons loose, and the other one says he's overreacting and,
okay,
and no worries. And it says they're already, they're already kind of taking over our banking.
oh,
And two of the engineers or technicians, the computer started making decisions on its own, and it really scared them, so they unhooked the
Power source?
computers because it scared them, because they're scared, that they're gonna start taking over, and when they won't be able to pull the plug on them. And you can listen to Billy Crone on YouTube.
and that's CROHN.
CRONE.
We all know the movie The Terminators, where the machines
Yeah,
start
that's what
building
he had on
machines.
there too.
That's not that improbable, that could, that could easily happen where they start building, take over, they build machine build machine.
Yeah,
Billy Crone had that on his DVD. Yeah, it's Billy Billy, Crone CRONE, and then AI.
Oh, you already have Alexa listening in.
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Getting
well,
all
there's
the-
something now that if you have Alexa or those smart doorbells or, the smart appliances that they're gonna network them all now together. Then you have until June 9th to say if you wanna have this happen to your, your smart doorbell or smart refrigerator or,
Yeah, there's something they said about a refrigerator too, about,
yeah,
send the shopping list to your husband
yeah,
and all. I mean,
This is called the Internet of Things, right?
It's
The
the
fact that all
Jetsons.
these devices, are kind of listening and watching you, and then you kind of operate
Yeah.
them, and then they,
It's like the Jetsons,
yeah,
like Rosie was the
Yeah.
maid,
robot.
the robot, and
Yeah.
they would have all their foods, they were just,
and it all came out boom.
yeah.
Kind of like Star Trek too. You don't know where the food ever came from, but it all magically appeared behind this little door that opened up. Yeah. How they disposed of it, I don't know either.
I watched two DVDs
I mean, did they?
and I had to
What
stop.
was the sewage system on the Star Trek? I don't know.
Probably like the airplanes.
Yeah, sometimes it just kind of falls out of the sky. So,
Well, that was just on the news a week ago, some big chunk of something frozen fell down and through a guy's roof. Well, you know that ain't coming from the airplane somewhere.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Oh,
What was it, John?
They didn't say what it was.
Oh.
It was a chunk of something.
and it fell right through the roof?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so,
Well, we were talking before we started a class about all this, people using this computers and stuff, not to our good. You know, ransomware and all this and that, it's getting worse and worse all the time.
well, that's just it, yeah, I mean, it's kinda scary, you know, what's gonna be next now? I know, I was talking with a member yesterday, and, he pointed out, he said, Pastor, some things just shouldn't be on the internet. He said, maybe some things just need to go back to paper and pencil, you know? Maybe that's not such a bad idea, so I don't know. Call me a Luddite, but that makes sense to me, so.
I just remembered one more thing he said. The computer's food is all that data from Facebook and every place else, that it has to keep being fed this information, their food, because that's how it gets smarter, so that it knows everything about everything. So they have to have this info, from everybody, and that's where it comes from, Facebook and
Twitter.
I don't know what else, all whatever, and I thought,
See now, if there is ever a reason to get off of Facebook, do it now. Don't feed the machine. Okay, well, let's move on. According to some critics, much of science is inherently immoral because it attempts to play God. The question whether science is really about helping others or about glorifying the powers of the scientists and providing products that we would really be better off without, but find almost impossible to resist. That's absolutely true too. Others see science as simply amoral, as a powerful instrument that can be used for good or evil. Scientists themselves sometimes excuse work that they know will be used unethically, saying they are only concerned with the truth, and how that truth is used is someone else's business. So in other words, it's kind of like Pontius Pilate washing your hands. What really is truth? Or you think of Cain. Cain in the Old Testament, I mean, what was his answer to God after God said to him, sin is crouching at the door, and after he did the deed? Am I my
brother's
keeper? Right. I'm only accountable to myself. Why are you asking me that? That's my business. And that's what sin does. I mean, sin is just an inherently self-focused attitude. Me, myself, and I. Me, myself, and I. And we see that, happening one generation after Adam and Eve.
Well, you can see that when, what was his name, when they developed the atomic bomb, releasing that energy from an atom and they're splitting it. I mean, it's just tremendous energy that God created. But look what mankind's done with that. I mean, most of it is, now we're sitting there with atomic weapons aimed at each other.
Exactly. And now we got viruses on the loose. The other thing.
And going back to Cain, I was just thinking, and then Cain said to God, my punishment is too much for me to bear. I thought, he did all this, and now he doesn't want to pay the punishment for what he did. Then he was whining about that.
Right. I'm not really responsible for it because in my own mind, it was perfectly justifiable. Right. Yeah. Okay, so the idea that science is a vocation that falls under God's law is virtually absent, kind of in that thinking there. The idea that scientists are citizens and brothers of all other human beings is not considered often enough, and that's very true. The fact that, doctors take that Hippocratic oath, of do no harm. But now that's kind of fallen to the wayside too. Abortion, euthanasia, research, gain of function, all that kind of thinking. All of that is beginning to filter in that, there's some more motives that are higher and better. Because, like I said with the virus research, if we don't know what's going to happen here, Or if we don't do this, how do we not know that the other people don't already have that research? And will use it against us. That's kind of the thinking, so. And I mean, think about this. What was it, 10, 15 years ago? We were all worried about weapons of mass destruction, right? Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Well, I think we've lived through a weapon of mass destruction, a very mild one, because it really only affected less than 1% of the world's population. But what would happen if someone released something that would be terribly powerful? And there's that thinking that's out there that some people have, that the earth is overpopulated. So we have to take care of that. I mean, it's sick thinking. Kind of like Mary Shelley. Frankenstein, right? Okay, science and morality. As we've seen in chapter 1, humans have been given a cultural mandate to subdue the earth, okay? And you know, even among Christians, that raises a lot of question marks about subduing the earth, that scientific, environmentalism, they all want to talk about a pristine earth, and that sometimes or somehow man is like a virus on the earth, and that the earth would be so much better off if there were less human beings, or even no human beings at all. Okay? And when you start traveling, here during the vacation season, you'll see so many areas like up in Door County or up in the Upper Peninsula or over in Michigan that are kind of like nature preserves now. That people have literally donated the lands that are kind of hands off to the average person, so that the earth can be pristine. We don't walk in these places anymore because we want the earth to heal itself. I think that's kind of scary too,
They won't let you walk.
No, they don't want anyone in that area, because it's all just to be left as nature intended it. See, they talk about, when people talk about Mother Nature, I mean, that's what you're talking about is a God, right? You're making the earth a God. So, and the earth is, when it comes to human being, it's like little Willie who gets up and shakes himself to get the fleas out, or the dander, or whatever he does. That earth is like that too. We just got to shake off some more human beings because there's just too many of them. So,
what island is that in Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, where no motor vehicles are allowed? Mackinac.
Mackinac, right? Yeah. And then there's some of those little islands that are north of Washington Island, St. Simon, and they're little bitty islands there. And I mean, those are like nature preserves too. No one goes on those islands. It's completely off limits.
It's maybe good. If we get the water raised, they'll probably drown.
Well, I think the water table is going down again. It really is. I mean, they've said that Lake Michigan has been dropping and dropping again. This stuff is cyclical. That's the way the good Lord made it. Okay? I can remember 15 years ago, Sarah's family, they've got, a cottage up there in Traverse City, and we were up there, and there's an area there called Mission Point, and it kind of jets out into Lake Superior. And it's when the water table is real low, and you could just walk out, into all these areas and see all these rocks and blah, blah, blah. And all of you, global warming. This is global warming, this is terrible. Well, it's cyclical. That's the way things operate. We can't all get crazed about this stuff. If we believe what the Apostle Paul says in Colossians chapter 1, that God is holding all things together, well, then we just need to trust the Lord that He's got His plan going. So,
Some years back, out west, they're always low on water, because they're just over, that land is built for raising, probably irrigating and everything. But they had their eye on, they were gonna run a pipeline from our area in Great Lakes, because we're on this big aquifer here. That got shot down, but I think they'll be back again. I don't know the pros and cons of it though, but Right.
And, you know, in the Great Plains, there is actually a huge Great Lake that's underground called the Olagala Reserve or Reservoir. And it's this huge, massive underground lake. And, you know, a lot of the water, you know, when there's, you know, so much water, it all filters down into that. Okay? And then it, you know, God just has this balance thing going on, you know, back and forth. So, now, you know, getting back to this idea of the cultural mandate of subduing the earth, does God want us to use our brains when it comes to subduing the earth? Absolutely. There is such a thing called land management, forest management, all that kind of stuff, okay? We want to be responsible stewards of the earth. We don't want to be like the 1800s where, I mean, you've seen all those old photographs where everything was clear cut. Or even here on the Wolf River. I mean, the Wolf River was a major transporting thing for logs that went down to where? You know where it ended up? Yeah. You know who was in charge of all that?
Not me.
Not you, no. Not me either. His name was Payne.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes, Payne. He ran all the sawmills. That's why he has that big old mansion that sits on the north side. That's the art center now for Oshkosh.
Well, they say Tustin sits on a big sawdust pile. Because it was filled when they had they filled in the swampy area and built, that's where Tustin sits on.
Okay.
Kind of like Gila Resort, huh?
I don't know.
Well.
That's telephone poles and dirt.
Oh, really?
Really? Okay.
A lot of it.
You know, I get any lighter fluid there. Or a match.
Well,
This ain't gonna hurt us.
No, I just kidding.
how can the world be overpopulated with all the abortions all over the world? You know, that they've killed millions of
Millions
babies.
and millions.
Well, they feel that, oh, now just think, okay, now I'm playing the devil's advocate. If all of those people had lived, Susan, my gosh, where would we be?
Where we are now.
Well, they would
I
have
know.
some kind of fancy explanation
I
for you
know,
that
they
we would.
just had on the news that China's gonna allow every couple to have 3 children.
That's right.
instead of
Right.
2.
I heard that too.
Yeah.
Because they're in population trouble.
Right.
They're in
And they need
population
them
trouble.
armies, they gotta get them
Exactly.
armies built back up so they can
Right.
conquer the world,
Cause they gave all those girls away or killed them.
kill them.
Right.
So, okay, well, let's move on here. One of the ways that, so we're talking about the cultural mandate of subduing the earth. One of the ways that they can do this is through the vocation of science. Also, we have noted that if the world is no longer perfect. It is a fallen world afflicted with disease, discomfort, drudgery, and poverty. Many of the early scientists saw their work as a means of easing the consequences of the fall. For example, Robert Boyle became interested in chemistry partly because he hoped to make inexpensive remedies for the many ailments afflicting the poor. Robert Boyle was an Irishman, very wealthy, came from a very well-to-do family, who was really, I think you could call him kind of the father of the scientific method. In other words, the fact that you got a problem, and so you present an experiment that explains how this works. Okay? You don't come in with a preconceived idea of how it's going to work, but in other words, you let the research determine what the truth is. You don't doctor the research so that your idea of the truth becomes the truth. Okay, which is really happening today. So in a lot of areas. So Robert Boyle is, you know, I think he's remembered as really the first one who came up with the idea of the scientific method. To scientists such as Boyle, science was conceived within a moral context. So in other words, I'm responsible to someone. I'm accountable to someone. And that someone, of course, would be the Lord. I'm not just accountable to myself, as necessarily serving the needs of fallen humanity. It was not directed at harm or selfish gain, nor was viewed merely as an instrument to be used in good ways and bad. So how does viewing science as a vocation restore its moral dimensions? So when he talks about a vocation, he has this idea of the fact that you have God-given talents and abilities. If you believe that your talents and abilities have come from God, how are you gonna use those talents and abilities? First of all, to praise God, and then to be of benefit to those around you, which is how Boyle and a lot of people lived. I mean, in the 1800s, there was a doctor by the name of Dr. Lister. Dr. Lister's one main product is still used today, Listerine. Okay, he was a chemist, and he came up with this disinfectant that we use for our mouths, but actually in the 1800s, they used it as a disinfectant for wounds. Okay, so Dr. Lister. Sir Alexander Fleming in the 1920s with the invention of antibiotics with penicillin. There was another man who, understood that, he was accountable to the society as a whole. So if you understand that your vocation comes from God, well then you're going to look at science a little bit differently. In other words, it isn't going to be, well, can I get a patent out of this? How much money am I going to make? Last night too, I was watching Tucker Carlson, and he was talking about, those of you who watched, vaccine billionaires. You see that segment? Anyone watch? Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of vaccine billionaires now. How did they become billionaires?
Charge too much.
They patented the research. And people are beginning to ask, well, you know what? A lot of this research came at the cost of whom?
Taxpayer.
There we go, John. Ding, 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 ding. Very good. For the U.S. taxpayer. So if the money, the research came from the U.S. taxpayer, what should we do with the patent?
Should be for the good of the nation.
There you go. Very good. Yeah, that's exactly right. So
So when we get our vaccines, they always say, well, it's free. It's not really free.
no,
It goes through our taxes.
right. So okay. So what can we say to those modern scientists who say they are just doing their job and need not concern themselves with how their results are used?
They're accountable.
You're accountable. You're responsible. You will have to answer someday for the benign robots that you created. And there's always little happy things on Google News, about, I guess in Japan, they've created robots that take care of the elderly now. They have them kind of dressed up. I mean, they look like robots. I mean, they don't look like human beings. They kind of look like Rosie, from Jetsons. They got a little apron on her and kind of a, the typical smiley face, It interacts with the elderly and talks to them and blah, blah, blah. But the U.S. military is also creating killer robots that look like dogs.
Yeah, I've seen those.
I have too.
It's
kinda
like
scary.
that one show, I can't remember that show and that girl. I'm sorry, I can't think of it, but then on the end they showed like these panthers and that robot.
Tearing down doors.
Yeah.
Well, they use them for bombs. If there's a bomb in the building, they'll send in this little robot.
Yeah, and that would certainly be a wonderful use of
Yeah.
robotic technology. But,
And
to buy a killer robot for yourself because I don't like my
The
neighbor.
surgery, surgery, robotics.
I know, but what if they go nuts?
Oh,
You know what I
if they
mean?
break down.
And they scramble everything up inside.
Yeah, it's just like, no, stop!
Well, you won't be awake, so.
But generally, now, someone correct me if this is wrong, I mean, with the robotic surgery, there is a surgeon who is guiding the robot.
Right, with a computer.
With a computer, right. Yeah, I mean, because the robot's apparatus there is much steadier than that of a human being. So, I mean, when you have to make really delicate surgery, I mean, when you're dealing with nerves,
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
I had my prostate removed, robotic surgery.
did you? Okay.
It's just, well, it was 4 little incisions that weren't very big.
They went in there and got her out. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, I mean, yeah, they can do
Heart
surgery that
surgery
is gonna
too.
be so invasive, right?
Heart surgery, they can do a lot.
Where heart surgery used to be where they would literally
Cut you open.
gut you open like a bluegill, Yeah, they did that, literally,
Yeah.
Cracked
Holy-
your sternum.
yeah, pulled your rib cage apart to get at it,
It
so,
makes a lot of difference in healing when they can do it.
yeah, right. So, science in that case is a great blessing for all of us, right, so.
I had a bona fide doctor put my pacemaker in. I heard everything they said.
Oh, you did, okay.
Trips, nurses, retirement,
Yeah, I did.
Oh, did you?
yeah, everything.
Really?
You hope they don't say, uh-oh.
I heard him say though, I'm gonna need more strength.
I had that once when Dr. I won't say his name, pulled the tooth, and he's working on it, and all of a sudden, there's a big crack, and then he says, uh-oh. There's a rudhead crack, you didn't want that in there.
You didn't want that in there, okay.
Oh my goodness.
So, well, page 41, we need to be careful. All vocations are under God's law. In some ways of finding cures or labor-saving devices may indeed be immoral. Well, abortion, gain of function research. Furthermore, the unnecessary or excessive use of some of these items may reflect poor stewardship and do more harm than good. Efficient, reliable transportation is a great boon of scientific technology. Yet there are many inefficient vehicles that drain resources and produce unnecessary pollution. Well, I think that needs a little more further clarification, because now, well, what's the big push now among car manufacturers? Electric vehicles, okay? Now, from what I've been reading, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, it takes a lot of resources to mine rare metals, the lithium that makes the batteries and the other elements, okay? It takes a lot of mining technique where you're using up a lot of energy just to get at the raw material. Once the battery is produced, and when it's been used up, to get rid of it is just as bad or even worse. Okay? So all we hear, is the evil of, fossil fuels. And yesterday's Wall Street Journal, the front page had an article of all the states now, believe it or not, that are banning natural gas.
That's what we heat our house with.
Yeah, out in the Southwest. I mean, from California and just a little band all the South. They're all going to get rid of natural gas. They're all going to go to electric.
That's expensive.
Well, exactly. And when it comes to electricity, how are you producing electricity? With natural gas.
That's California.
And New Mexico and Arizona and Nevada and Oklahoma and, supposedly they're gonna come out with a whole new line of all of these efficient electric stoves and, the article went on and on about all the things that are being rolled out.
Sunday I watched This Old House on public TV, I don't know if you ever seen it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And they had an electrician on there, and people are now putting, when they have a garage built, they're putting in the electric charging your car overnight. And you don't charge your car overnight on a 120. It would take like a full day.
It's kind of like a electric dryer.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
inside an electric dryer plugged in, that takes a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a lot of juice going through there. Yeah, exactly.
And then on top of that, because fossil fuel, you're paying tax on gas, but now they want to tax the electrics because they're not being taxed with the electricity. You pay for the electricity and everything, but it's not being taxed as road tax or wheel tax or gas tax.
Right.
So
Well, they've got that figured out now too. If everyone goes to electric cars, then you're gonna be charged per mile. Yeah, they got you coming and going.
Well, they have to. Who's gonna build the roads for them to be on?
Okay, well now this brings up the next point I was going to make, okay? And that's public transportation, okay? Now this is just my thinking here, but I think public transportation would be a good thing. What would be so bad about going back to trains?
Nothing.
I don't think there'd be anything bad about going back to
I
trains.
don't think so.
I don't know why we can't make trains more useful in our country, okay? So, I mean,
And we're way behind on it compared to Europe
right.
and Japan.
It would be wonderful if there was like a, well, I hear my father-in-law and my parents talked about that, which were all called the interurbans. You ever remember that? Well, you probably remember that from Chicago. The interurbans. These were, small line train tracks that ran out from the hub of a city, and they would bring the people in. I mean, you can still catch kind of like an interurban from Milwaukee to Chicago.
Right.
Why can't we have stuff like that? Why can't that be feasible?
That's how I got to the loop.
Is that how you got to the
Rock
loop?
Island
Is
down
that how you
the
got to,
station.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
cheap,
cheap?
wasn't,
Yeah,
I don't know, 25 cents or 50 cents.
yeah.
Well, that's probably more
Was
than
it
$5 now,
Was it subsidized?
probably, by the government.
Well, the problem is, if you're going grocery shopping and you've got 3-4 bags of groceries, then it's kinda awkward having to go on a bus, how are you gonna get that?
Now you use Amazon.
I did it with
That's
two
on
kids.
the outside.
Yeah, right.
And they'll use a drone.
I rode the bus from, I lived in a suburb, Oak Lawn. I'd walk 2 blocks to get to the bus with 2 little kids, 3 and 4,
Okay,
and come home after shopping with 2 bags of groceries and 2 kids. And you'd be surprised. People get up and give you, would give me their seat with my kids, help me get off the bus, and then I just would walk home.
oh,
So,
Dolores.
I mean, it
Nowadays-
was,
Nowadays,
it was
there would be
wonderful.
parents that would tell you that's way too much.
oh, hey, kept me young. All that walking.
Way too much, Dolores.
It was a wonderful time to grow up.
You were
And
nuts
be
to even
young.
think about doing that. Just kidding.
Take
No, I
the
mean, we all
IC
did
to
that.
Indiana,
What?
the IC to Indiana, to the beach, to the dunes.
Okay,
It was our senior class trip, we all rode. And that was electric.
right.
Well, I don't know, if one of them, Tesla or whoever it is, it's in California, I know they started building it. They got underground, it's like a tube when you lay in there and then you're gonna shoot you like a bullet. It's in the planning stage.
Not me.
I'm not going on that roller coaster either. That rodeo's not for me either.
See, that's another way they're trying to kill people.
So,
But I wonder what people thought when elevators started, or even the
escalator.
escalators.
Oh yeah, my great aunts were afraid to use escalators. Cause they saw people that lost their foot. I said, well, where did that happen? Well, it happened in a big city. And there's never any, it's all pretty indefinite, but it happened. And someone lost their foot in there, well, like they wouldn't have a stop mechanism on there. But they
Or they
were-
probably didn't at first.
Well, that could be true,
They
yeah.
learned.
That's right.
Well, in the airports, they have these people movers, it's all kinda interesting, get on there, but a lot of people, you're on there, but you're still gonna walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Stay to the right, you don't have to. Yeah.
No, there's somebody in front of you probably won't, so yeah.
Watch out for the guy that's running on it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so while humans are given dominion over creation, it is dominion of stewardship, not a license for wasteful greed or practices that poison the air, earth, and water. Okay, I think we'd all agree with that, myself included. We have to be responsible stewards. That's why God made us in the image of God. He gave us minds, to figure out and to reason and to think these things through. So, our last question, well, let's keep moving here. How does the vocation of scientists provide an ethic for environmental care? And how is this ethic markedly different from the extremes of nature worship or unrestrained exploitation and development? I guess we talked about that, the fact that those old photographs of logs being floated down rivers and the ground just being bare because of all the clear cutting. What do paper companies do today when they
Plant trees.
They plant sustainable growth, exactly. So, and from what I hear too, they're doing 2 or 3 times as much planting as before, the harvesting was taken away. So, I mean, that's all good stuff.
And that's for their benefit too down the road, I mean, you know, so they have a product that they keeps coming in for to make paper.
Exactly, right,
And lumber and everything else.
right, so. Yeah, and then you think of individual cars versus public transportation. I mean, it's nice that there's a freeway out here, Highway 10, but it's just one of me coming in the car. And I mean, if you would look at probably 98% of the traffic that's on Highway 10, it's just one person in the car, right? Some of that could be eased with interurbans or something like that. It'd be very good.
Did they used to have a trolley that went from Wapaka to Waiwega?
Was there?
Remember?
Well, they're tearing up Main Street with Pack, and there are trolley tracks, I guess, underneath that.
Yeah, but I don't know where it went to.
Well,
I don't know if it went to.
I don't know.
I think it went to King.
Oh, I don't know.
But there was a street, do you remember that they dug up that old streetcar in Waiwega? Going, yeah?
Dug it up, or was it in somebody's shed?
No.
Oh, I think I
No,
remember that
it was
story
in
about
the
that.
ground, they had built a shed around it, I guess.
Oh,
But they
Oh,
tore it
yeah.
down and there was,
yeah, I
not far
remember.
from where Nancy
It was in the paper.
was.
Right.
How did it get there? You know, nobody seemed to know.
They buried it.
They didn't want it anymore, and some farmer said, I'll take it, I'll make something useful out of it. So,
Yeah, somebody took it. I don't remember who, but
right.
that just happened a couple of years ago.
Oh.
Well, scientists are not called to be gods, usurping God's lordship over life and death. It's important to consider the implication of Yaki's middle of the road for scientific ethics. When scientists treat human life as disposable experimental items, they act outside their vocation. For example, Nazi scientists engaged in the dehumanizing experiments. They would take prisoners and they would put them into kind of a refrigerator and then gradually lower the temperature until they would find the point when, you know, real major hypothermia set in and they actually died. Okay. And you think of, wasn't that during World War II, was it the Tuskegee experiments that they did on African Americans, where they would, you know, infect them with certain things? You're nodding your head. You're an old Army guy, you know.
It was sexually transmitted diseases and other things, and then it went on to mind-altering drugs. And
Okay.
that was a different experiment. But
Wasn't it also, they were to sterilize them?
yep.
Right.
That's why they
So-
say they're not big on taking this vaccine, African Americans.
That's right. So, you know, I think we always need to be careful, you know, that, you know, you know, nowadays everyone throws that term around, Nazis, you know, but, I mean, we got enough dirt on our hands too, when it comes to experimentations and stuff like that, that's going on. You know, it's not really talked about widely, but, you know, it has happened. And the fact that scientists, I mean, it's coming out. I mean, a lot of this virus business the research was being done here in America. And when the laws came in place that you can't do this gain of function research, well, then what happened? They took it over to China, where it could happen.
Fauci knew that.
That's right.
I wonder how much money he made in the last year.
He said he's the richest man in Washington DC.
Yeah, I
Oh,
thought
that's
so.
true. Little Fauci, the cute little guy.
Oh.
Oh, he's such a nice guy. Look at him. He talks so nice. He's got everything under control.
You started to talk like me. But that's true. I mean, yeah, they come on with a nice smile and a nice, you know, good bedside manner because he's a doctor, you know, and, you know, everyone believes everything. So, right. So another horrific idea is cloning human beings to provide spare parts for other human beings. And I hope we have enough time. I've got a little video to watch. It actually is from CNN, and it's kind of interesting here.
Yeah, boo. CNN.
is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond. This is the kitchen where the new boyfriend will
I'm Jorge Rivas, and you're wondering. So here's a list of animals that have been cloned. Not on that list, humans. Yeah. So just how important is cloning technology? And should we be worried about evil clone armies in the future?
Cloning has played a role far larger than I think it's likely to play in the future of science and medicine. The money, the ability to do something useful with cloning is probably over on the research side of cloning, not on the reproductive.
That means cloning to create stem cells that can grow into replacement organs. And while that's pretty cool, science fiction likes to take it one step further.
I think Hollywood is absolutely in love with the idea of human cloning. They can sort of use it as the archetypical villain. Cloning fears play on a couple of things. They sort of challenge our notion of uniqueness and individuality. They also sort of raise the issue of, well, how much of who we are can be duplicated or replicated or manufactured.
Like TVs, or alarm clocks, or cell phones, or Pop-Tarts. Hey, look what I found. But even if a cloned person was created, that doesn't mean it would be an exact copy of the original.
We're not merely the kind of automatic readout of our genes. We should think of our genome as a kind of diary, but not a diary that has been written upon yet.
Which means that you, version 2.0, would have a very different set of experiences than the original you. Why are you dressed like that? I was at the pirate bar. They made me an honorary pirate. Arr. Is this thing still rolling? Where are you going? While some groups claim to have cloned human embryos or even delivered an actual cloned baby, there's no proof of it.
Any effort to try to make a baby by cloning, given the very, very high probability that the baby's going to be seriously abnormal, is just completely morally unjustifiable.
Both Murray and Kaplan support a ban on cloning for reproductive means, but neither think that ban should extend to stem cell research. So is there any chance we'll actually see a human version of Dolly the sheep?
We're going to have to prove that it can really be developed safely without death and deformity in animals. If that happens, then we might see someone try to clone a human being for, to have an offspring in 30 or 40 years.
Even then, Kaplan sees reproductive human cloning as a red herring for more pressing bioethical questions on the horizon.
I think what we need to be worried about is efforts to improve, enhance, and optimize human beings, either by putting technology into them or by changing their genetic makeup. I think we have much more to worry about with cyborgs than I do clones.
Oh, great. So instead of huge evil clone armies to deal with, we'll just have to worry about cyborgs.
Okay. Turn that off. That's just a little overview. I mean, did you catch that between cloning and cyborgs? What that is? Okay, cloning would be, actually trying to duplicate a copy of you, like this piece of paper going through a copier. A cyborg would be implanting technology in you or altering your DNA or your gene thing to enhance you as a human being. I mean, this is the thinking that's out there now. I mean, this is actively being researched. I mean, now, do I go along with him by saying that, well, it's morally unethical for it to clone human beings? I don't believe that for a minute, given the climate that we're in. Given the fact that China is what China a lot of times does. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any kind of moral compass going on there. It's research for research's sake. And who cares if it's immoral? Maybe it could be used. That's what gets to be frightening. And I mean, they're already talking about, the fact that they could implant something in your head that would actually, connect you to a computer. To enhance you.
Well, hearing aids do that. You can answer your phone or do other stuff.
Yeah.
And in Chippewa Falls, they started with the implant in your hand, a little chip, so you could, get in the building or, buy a soda or lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Or a chip in little kids so they know where they are.
Yep.
Heard that.
Right. Dogs are chipped now.
dogs.
But in cloning the soul, God gives you a soul. You
Yeah.
that one to you that the soul isn't going to split in one in each one or anything.
Yeah, see, this just raises so many questions, and I really don't, I haven't done the research, to really talk about this, with any degree of
That's good.
expertise, about the soul, right, exactly. Or even the sheer fact of cloning bits and pieces of you for extra body parts. I mean, did you catch that there was a little petri dish with a human ear in it? I mean, they do have the technology where they could actually grow an ear.
Will it work, or just?
Well, it's just the ear, it's not the innards of the ear.
Prosthetic.
For looks.
Yeah, right. Or a nose, I mean, now that could be a benefit to someone who lost a nose or an ear.
And that's all good stuff.
Yeah, that would all be good
That's all
stuff,
good.
right?
But they forget about God. That's the whole trouble.
There you go.
Forget like the Tower of Babel, people back in those days the same way. It's gonna come to an end.
Yep, it'll come to an end,
God's
right?
in control and he will.
Right.
Last Sunday night, I hadn't seen it for quite a while, many years. It was the Gladiator. They had the movie Gladiator on there with Russell Crowe.
Yeah, that's such a good movie.
It is. It really shows you the Roman during that time, And,
The attitudes and the culture, yeah. Mhm. Life was cheap, extremely cheap. And it, you hear that old phrase, Darwinian, social Darwinianism of the survival of the fittest. I mean, that was true. It was kill or be killed.
But they also did believe, they called, was it Elysium or something, Heaven Elysium, or
Right.
showed that he's going to be reunited with his wife and child and all this.
And they had their little clay gods there, and they had
Yeah,
their
he had those little clay guys.
the little candles burning and whatever. He and the black guy, right? Yeah.
He buried it at the Coliseum, but of course I'm kind of quirky. He didn't bury him very deep. I thought you should get it deeper.
Well, he wanted the little guy to see. He wanted to be aware of what was going on. So preserve us. Right. But yeah, I mean that little video, makes the difference between cloning and cyborgs. I mean that's a distinction that's going on today. I mean we need to be aware of that too. That the enhancement of the human condition by means of technology. And that's probably where the thrust of scientific research is going to be heading, at least in this country. I can't speak for China, so, right. Okay, so question 40 says, what are some other ways in which scientists may be tempted to act outside of their vocation in their treatment of human beings? Well, there's the whole idea of cloning. Does this cloned organism have a human soul? That's a very good question. How is this cloned organism going to be used? I mean, are they going to be able, okay, now, most of us are in our 60s and on up. I mean, if that would happen in the next 10 years and they say everyone can get a clone, well, what would you be tempted to do with that clone?
Give them the hard jobs.
Yeah, okay. Well, you're thinking nice, Natalie. You're thinking really nice, but if you got heart disease, or your kidneys are giving up, or your liver is failing, what are you gonna do? Hey,
Yeah.
we're going to St. E's
Yeah.
next week. Guess what? You're gone. I'm living. This is just, it brings up, all sorts of bad things.
Well, that's as a society, we're headed in that direction now. I'm not against it. Something wears out, well, let's just replace it with something, another one.
Yeah.
Keep you living longer and longer.
Right, and it's good that, on your driver's license, you can get the organ donor thing, but let's say if you're hanging by a thread as a result of an auto accident, and you've got some pretty good organs in you yet, what do you think is gonna happen?
euthanasia.
Well, if you have it on your driver's license,
Yeah, I suppose.
they'll use your organs, and that's
Right.
fine.
Well, they won't do
Nothing.
much to help you, you know?
Yeah, that's the other
Won't do
side,
much
they
to
might
help
not
you
do
if
much to
you're-
help you.
Sometimes I think you're better off going to the other side anyways.
Yeah.
Well, and we do have those directives right now where, maybe you've got, legal documents that say, don't use extraordinary measures on me
Yeah, we do.
if I'm in that situation.
No hope.
Right, right, don't keep me alive as a vegetable,
Exactly.
Right.
That's what we have.
right, exactly, if it's, evidently that's my time, that'll be my time to be with the Lord,
It's not an easy thing to do.
yeah,
No, it's not,
right.
cause I went through that.
Yeah.
You gotta remember
We
this,
did with Roy.
the new 70 is 80. We're living longer.
But after you get so old, would you really wanna get a liver or kidneys to make
Right.
you live? that
Okay,
much
see now,
longer than
you're
those?
talking as a Christian, but if you are completely, this world, this life, and everything in it, you're gonna try to squeeze every last
In and out.
bit of drop of life that you can get.
Well, don't we do that with cancer now? I mean, we take every little, you can talk tough, but when it really happens to you, you will take whatever they'll give you if you
Right.
just extend your time.
Right, exactly.
Choices have to be made.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed very few people live into the hundreds, they've shown some on TV, but your body is just so aged.
Right.
I mean, it isn't that they can make you like a 20 or 30-year-old anymore.
No, that, it's not in the cards anymore, no, exactly.
Yeah, but there are some in their hundreds that are still doing volunteer
Yeah.
work.
And some
It's
people
amazing,
just,
yeah.
some of them smoke cigarettes and drink crap, and they're in good shape, and you wonder,
How did
what's
they
that
do it?
all about?
Yeah, right. How did that work? Right, exactly.
But even if they could make you to be 20 again, would you wanna go through all that?
Or I think of Janice Hartfield's mother, she lived to be 112. She was living with her, where the Hartfield's farm was. She was sharp as a tack. She was a member at St. Martin's Clintonville, but that was, wow, an incredible story too. So, living that long.
Some just have
But
good
she
genes.
but she said there was no joy in being old either.
Oh.
Right.
I mean, you're the last leaf on the tree. There's no one your age anymore. No one of your generation.
All your friends have died,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and you just think,
So now we're talking from the perspective of being a child of God, because we know what the hereafter is all about through Christ our Savior. But for people who don't, well, they're gonna grasp at anything.
it's pretty sad.
Yeah, so we always, I think we have to measure our life through the words of the Apostle Paul. Whether we live to the Lord. Whether we die to the Lord. Whether we live or die, we're the Lord's. That's finally what it comes down for us as God's children. Are we gonna avail ourselves of medical technology? Absolutely. We're not gonna be like, the Christian scientists or other people who, don't use this stuff. But at the same time too, we recognize that human technology, human ingenuity, human science, medicine, they all have their limits. It all comes to an end sooner or later. So let's close this section here. It says, many scientists pursue highly ethical research from which many human beings benefit. For example, geneticists have discovered the specific causes of hereditary diseases such as cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease, and many germline therapies can do nothing to stop original sin, but it can prevent offspring from suffering some of the temporal consequences of sin. And that's really the benefit of medicine. Even this cutting research medicine with gene therapy and stuff like that. The fact that they've been able to identify specific genes that cause certain conditions, and they can alter that. Change that so that offspring don't have this, so.
Well, there's a downside to that, they can tell the baby, that's why I think a lot of people, they go for abortions. When the doctors tell them, well, your child's gonna have this
Right, and
Down
that's,
syndrome or whatever, it's gonna be.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct, John. I mean, we don't wanna sit there and say, well, okay, we've done the genetic tests on this fetus here, and, they're gonna be such and so and so, and, you know, doctor recommends an abortion, well.
It's not the sex that you think you want.
Or the sex that you want, right, exactly,
That is really terrible, you know.
yeah, right, so,
We know too much, we're getting too smart,
yeah,
just like in the Tower of Babel.
yeah, so,
Or like
exactly.
before the flood, when Earth was destroyed by a flood for a reason. Too smart, too
Yeah.
evil.
I mean, that period of time always has fascinated me too, just wondering, I mean, you hear about the wickedness, but you also wanna know like the culture, like you were saying with the gladiator. I mean, the fact that you got the full feeling for what the Roman Empire was through the eyes of this man, Russell Crowe, who was a general in the army under Marcus Aurelius and then lost his position. And actually became a slave, became a gladiator.
Yeah, that was a good movie.
Yeah, fascinating.
Well, what was the struggle? Marcus Aurelius wanted the people, the Senate to rule just like we have our government. But of course, his son Commodus, who was insane, he wanted to be like a dictator or ruler.
God.
So there was that struggle in there.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of playing out in America today too. It really is. It's just the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah, right.
Our country's evil, the world is evil.
Of course, some of those
But our God is
senators
great.
weren't so upright either. I mean, they're in it for themselves too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Human nature. I mean, it never changes.
Right. Well, we better close, the bells are ringing, so we'll close with the blessing. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.